XML databases, but nobody will say that. And relational databases were just coming on the scene, and it was a very confusing landscape. And then Peter Chen came along with the ER model, the entity relationship model. And if you use it as a reference model, suddenly you can explain all the differences between the three original kinds of databases, and it all became much more clear. Okay? And so when we started working on delegation, what do we mean by delegation? Delegation is that activity which occurs at runtime when a user can't perform all their tasks and have to assign all or some of it to another user. The term delegation is often used to talk about allowing another machine to do user authentication on your behalf, but we're not talking about it that way. And we're not talking about role design. So we're not talking about design time. We're talking about runtime when exceptions occur. Okay? And so you start doing the literature survey. And there are 50 or 100 papers that talk about delegation with roles. And it's a very confusing landscape. But then we look at our model and say, well, let's treat it as a reference model. So what kinds of things can we be talking about? So the original role graph model has 5 main pieces to it. On the left, starting from the left, we have the relationships in the group graph, which I didn't actually explain, but the edges there mean that one of the thing at the tail of the edge is a proper subset of the group at the head of the edge. Group user role assignment, we have the role relationships in the role graph. We have privilege role assignments, and we have the privilege structure. And then we have sessions, which we didn't originally think about. So really 6 things to look at. And each of these can help explain what's going on in some of these very confusing papers about delegation. So when you do delegation, how do the role relationships come in? Well, you may have to create a role with precisely the privileges that you want to delegate. If you don't want to delegate everything that you have, you're creating a sub-role. Does it go in the role graph? Then it's, deals with the role relationships. You can talk about what gets delegated as a function of the privileges that a user can perform. And so that has to do with the privilege role assignment relationship. The privilege structure comes up in funny ways. So you can just flag a privilege as delegatable or non-delegatable. And I read one paper about people were talking about HTML actually, and so you could give permissions to somebody to update a piece of a web page. So what you have here is a hierarchical structure, right? It's like an XML document, and you're giving the permission on a sub portion of that object, and so you're not delegating the permission you have on the whole object. You're delegating part of the object, so it deals with the object structure. The most interesting one is the user role assignment. So people talk about role delegation. But what do they really mean? They're really saying that the users assigned to role 1 can be delegated to another role. Well, it has nothing to do with role 1. It has to do with the users. And it's really the user role assignment that's determining the delegatees, right? And so the proper way to think about it is that it's a function of user role assignment, not a function of role relationships. So you can use the information on the group graph as well to talk about only certain groups can be delegatees. So maybe you have accountants, you only want accountants to be delegated. And sessions, so the grantable privileges can be determined by your active roles. So what's happening in the present? RBAC is in a lot of products in some version or another. It's in a lot of these big things that manage a lot of applications together, like Tivoli, and I found something on a web page last week where there's something from Cisco that has roles. Ruby on Rails has roles. Roles are everywhere. How useful is it? So suppose you're in a company that can't afford Tivoli or doesn't really need Tivoli because you're not that big, and you want to use roles to manage one of your applications. Okay, so maybe you do have some software that uses roles. Maybe you have Oracle, but the roles provided by Oracle are fairly primitive, and that's not. You need something fancier. Again, going back to databases, early on in the 60s, one of the things that happened was that data schemas were buried in COBOL programs, and one of the big things was moving them out of the COBOL programs into something else, which eventually became a database, so that you could share the data. So why wouldn't you share your role design among more than one application? And so we came up with this architecture. So the idea is that use your favorite RBAC model, design your RBAC system. So it could be an ANSI thing, it could be ours. Get happy with your role design. Write it out in a secure place in some format, probably XML. And then if you look at all the operations that you're going to use from the application program, it's probably just all the getter methods. Does this person have this privilege? Okay. And so produce a runtime thing that can be attached to all your programs, and it interprets the same role design in more than one application. So this was something we did recently. Okay, so I'm running out of time, so I'll speed up a little bit. Will it really scale up? What's the right granularity? So should you be applying roles at the application level, at least as allowed to use the accounting application, or it should be that within the accounting application, at least is allowed to look at row D, column 45, and update it. So what's the right granularity? If you get too small, the designs become so complex that you can't understand them. So you need a happy medium. There's still quite a bit of discussion going on about how to engineer your roles, whether you should do it top down or bottom up. I think if you have a lot of tools that let you see the consequences of what you're doing and get lots of feedback, it doesn't matter a whole lot which version of RBAC you use. It can still be useful. So my suggestion is use it as a design tool. So the ER model eventually became a design tool. There weren't really any commercial databases that I ever knew about that used the ER model. People used it as a design tool. Separate the design from the implementation. So if you have an RBAC design for your access control and implement it with policies, with some policy language, why not? So I think we need good tools, good implementations, and good interfaces with various pieces of software. Okay, so here's some references, and thank you very much for coming. Yeah.
Okay, so then I think I will tell others. Okay,
Okay.
thank you then.
Thank you. I'll leave this up for a minute.